Mr. McInnes said 10 to 11:20 is just enough time to start this conversation. There is so much in this text, and when we try to relate it to everyday things, that can become something else. So I do want you all to know, I'm starting right now by letting you know that the English department here at Jackson State has a course on Richard Wright, where Native Son is studied and some of his other works as well, Black Boy, and I know the short story series. And I want to let you know that that course was actually developed by Mrs. Celie McInnes, who is actually on the panel this morning. My name is Persephone McDaniels. I work in the English department. This is my 13th year here at Jackson State. 13th year here as a teacher, that is. I was a student with Mr. McInnes. And we won't talk about that because that could be a class in itself.
There you go.
I'm associate professor in the Department of English. And I'll start off by telling you that I've read Native Son several times. I have never taught Native Son. I've taught Black Boy, I've taught short stories, I've taught some essay series, but never Native Son itself. So I got really, really excited about having to look at it from this perspective today. And I'm not on your program as a panelist. I hope to say some things and give you some topics and put some things out there that will keep the conversation going. And like I said, it could go on and on and on, but I know we have a class session this morning. And at certain points as well, don't feel restricted or waiting on me to let you get started or ask your question. Just raise your hand and we can go from there. And even at some point, if we're having an open discussion, don't even worry so much about raising your hand. Just make sure we're respectful of other people when they're speaking. That's it. Our panelists this morning, and I'll start with our student, who is actually a freshman. Give him a hand. His name is Matthew Person. He's from Water Valley, Mississippi, up around Oxford, Mississippi, if you're not familiar with the town. He is an elementary education major. I asked him had he already had the introduction to education class where they take you around and show you really what's going to happen. He said yes, and he still wants to do it, so that's wonderful. He aspires to teach third grade, and he's 19 years old. And I don't know how many of you know that third grade is a crucial and very important year in the American education system. Anybody know why? This is directly attached to Native Son here. Anybody know why third grade? Yes. Say that very loud. Did you all hear that? Did you know that? In third grade, in standardized testing, it is predicted whether or not you will be a scholar and go on and continue in education like you are in college, or if you have the potential of ending up in prison. I see the look on her face. She's like, what? Third grade? Yes. It's also a time where most people are actually assigned to special education too. Yes. Okay. Our other panelists this morning, y'all want y'all to tell everybody you saw me using my iPad? Very good. Is Mr. Celie McInnes, who is an instructor in the English department here at Jackson State. He's also the publisher and editor of Black Magnolia's Literary Journal, the author of 7 books, including 4 collections of poetry, 1 collection of short fiction, and 1 work of literary criticism. I also want to let you know that he was the first runner-up in 2012 of the Amiri Baraka Sonia Sanchez Poetry Award, sponsored by North Carolina State AT&T, and he also was the first runner-up to be our very own poet laureate for the state of Mississippi, and actually introduced the woman who was selected as poet laureate when she was here last spring. And I'll tell you one more thing about him. You know, as professors, we are actually, I want to say, encouraged, made, restricted to, we have to publish. So one of the most recent things that I've published has actually been on the work of Mr. McInnes. So I was very proud to be able to actually write about the work of my own colleague. So if you would give our panelists a hand this morning.
And that check will be in the mail, so I appreciate it.
Okay, I'm going to start off by reading these 2 quotes. They are coming from the intro that John Riley actually sent in and had accepted for the Heath anthology of the American Lit. A lot of times when we see anthologies, it's always the North and always the North. This is the Heath, and I love it a lot. But I'll start by saying, for Native Son, written when he had long since joined the great migration of black people from the fields of the South to the ghettos of northern cities, he conceived a protagonist who would defy anyone's attempt to see him as a mere victim. Bigger Thomas is, much is right, the product of American racial practices, and like Wright, has a core of inviolable selfhood that gradually grows into a sense of self-determining purpose. But Wright also makes him the murderer of two women who have no immediately personal responsibility for his condition. They are, in terms of their role in the fiction, instruments that break the cycle of fear and self-denigration in which Bigger has been confined by the social and material conditions of his life. Of course, the novel is prophetic of the price a nation must pay for racism, and to its contemporary audience, it was a shocking reworking of the typical treatment of victims of society. Though Native Son will probably remain Wright's best-known work, it should be recognized that it bears close relationship to all of his subsequent writing, so that we are able to see a powerful consistency along with a broadening recognition of the significance of Black experience in Richard Wright's entire canon. You all can determine who goes first. Opening remarks.
As I was reading Native Son, I found that the book was very much similar to how, as a young adult, it is based on our life because, how can I say this? Because as young adults, we are faced with different situations in our lives, and it depends on how we have to, well, how can I say this? When we're faced with different situations, what is the right path? What is the right path to take? Okay, you have the good choice or you have the bad choice. Now, as bad choice, we could end up like Bigger did when we was faced with a difficult situation because first he wanted to go rob a white man, but he let his anger get the best of him, which ruined that plan. And so now he went on to work for a white man. And after that, of course, later on in the story, he got drunk with his boss's daughter and her boyfriend. And of course that led to the killing of the young girl. And I think that relates to us because like I said, when you are faced with a difficult situation, how are you going to handle that? And
that's a really good segue because I'll begin with about a couple of weeks. Jackson, city of Jackson, we experienced a shooting at a dice game. Young men, probably the age of most of y'all in here, multiple murder at a dice game. And then Monday night, my stepson, who is 30, his roommate was shot 13 times in their house. Somebody kicked in the door. My stepson came home Monday night, had dinner at University Club, stopped off somewhere, Monday night margaritas, noticed his door's been kicked in, his roommate shot 13 times. So there is this anger in inner city communities. There is this hopelessness. And Wright, in writing Native Son, is attempting to, as clearly as possible, show this hate and say, here is what hundreds of years of racism and Jim Crow has created. Wright is saying essentially, and he said this, he said that I wrote Native Son to scare the hell out of white people. That here is not just one Bigger Thomas. However, what we have missed since 1940 is Native Son should have also been written to scare the hell out of black America. Because we are the ones who are the ultimate victims of all of this violence. And so what I want to discuss just briefly, and then we'll open it up for discussion, is taking the shooting at the dice game and taking the murder of my stepson's roommate and taking Bigger Thomas's 2 murders. What we have to understand is what Wright shows us is that a combination of racism and self-hatred is creating a community that is destroying itself. Very early in the text, we get an understanding of both the self-hatred. Page 8. Bigger Thomas's mother says to him, "Bigger, sometimes I wonder why I birthed you." From a sociological standpoint, I don't even think we need to study much else. When a child is told by his mother, "I'm sorry I had you." Now, that's the extreme, but we have to understand that is no difference than when a mother or father says to their 6 or 7-year-old child, "Boy, you stupid. Boy, you dumb as hell. Boy, you make me sick. Sit your little ugly self down." These are all created in Bigger, sometimes I wonder why I birthed you. And then later, Bigger's sisters ask, "Well, why Bigger act that way?" And his mother's only answer is, "He just crazy." So, we have a segment of society birthed by people who don't want them. And Wright is clearly saying, as long as this community continues to have babies that they don't want and can't afford, the end result is what you get, Bigger. And who and what is Bigger? Well, Bigger is a person who is intellectually and emotionally arrested in his development. He has some ideas, but he's not able to thoroughly work through those ideas, and that keeps him from developing his fear. Page 10. Says that Bigger hated his family because he knew they were suffering and that he was powerless to help them. He knew that the moment he allowed himself to feel to its fullness how they lived, the shame and misery of their lives, he would be swept out of himself with fear and despair. So he held toward them an attitude of iron reserve. He lived with them, but behind the wall a curtain. And toward himself he was even more exacting. So he hates them and he hates himself for not being able to solve their situation. He knew that the moment he allowed what his life meant to enter fully into his consciousness, he would either kill himself or someone else. So he denied himself and acted tough, faked tough. This young man wants to teach 3rd grade. Why is that important? Here's what we need to understand. 1st through 7th grade. Do you know why little boys act out 1st through 7th grade? Because they don't know the answer to the question. That's why they act out. And it is better to be labeled a fool by your teacher than to be labeled ignorant or dumb. The problem is not enough of our teachers are looking at these young black boys between 1st and 7th grade and simply saying, "You're acting a fool not because you're stupid, you're acting a fool because you don't know the answer to the problem." We all fake tough, act tough as a way to say, "I don't care." So we have to understand, see, that's why the first section of the novel is entitled Fear. It's not about fear, it's about Bigger's failed reaction to fear, because Bigger doesn't understand that fear, being a primary emotion, creates other secondary emotions. So anger is not a primary emotion. You got to have one emotion before anger. So anger is the male's misguided reaction to fear. Because again, Bigger being intellectually and emotionally arrested in his development has not developed a way to properly act to fear. So when little boys are afraid, they think the best answer is to punch you in the eye. So when we return to parents who don't want their children, who are not adding to the development of their children, then we get a whole segment. And if you want to see a whole lot of Bigger Thomases, just turn on BET 106 and Park. And we just simply get different reincarnations of Bigger Thomases. Young men who are afraid who have been emotionally and intellectually arrested in their development. And so the only way they know how to react is to punch someone in the eye, have lots and lots of sex, hoping that that'll make them a man, or to try to buy themselves into manhood by buying a bunch of foolish stuff that they don't need that will ultimately land them in death. So we have all these misguided notions. And so Richard Wright is doing in 1940 what Tupac said many years later. Pac said, look, I don't know the answer to the question, but hopefully as an artist, if I keep writing about the problem, some of you intellects will actually. So the question that which Wright leaves us is, now that we know what made Bigger, now that we know that he has improperly reacted to his circumstance, the question for you all with your degrees, because y'all gonna be degree Negroes, y'all know that, right? Y'all gonna be the degree Negroes that the inner city people think y'all too good. And you wanna know why they gonna think y'all too good? Because half of you gonna get degrees and not gonna do a damn thing with them. Half of you gonna get degrees in social work and be worse for the community than the drug dealers. Half of you gonna get degrees in education and be worse on black children than the drug dealers. So Wright is asking, he's giving us the diagnosis, the prognosis with Native Son. So if you want to see the prognosis of what's wrong with inner city communities, the question is, all of you young Negroes that's getting your degrees, what are you going to do to lessen the amount of Bigger Thomases that exist in our neighborhood? And I'll stop there.
One logistic thing. People can only come through this room, through this door. So if you all can move a little bit this way, then it gives people a chance to sit down. The next thing is, based on your opening remarks, Mr. McGinnis, I gotta take notes.
Yes.
One of my topics I wanted us to talk about, because this is totally direct, is socially enforced poverty.
Did everybody hear Dr. McDaniel's first topic, which is socially enforced poverty? The question is, does anybody know, show of hands, one person or two, can tell us what you think? And this, you're not going to get a test. We're not going to say F and follow you around. What do you think when you hear, a couple of you, socially enforced poverty? Or give me an example of socially enforced poverty. Anybody? Okay, yes, sir?
It's like community growth, and like community growth.
Okay.
And what you see that they're doing, you say to yourself, well, hey, it seems like they making it, so at least let me try. At least my population more. But like, whereas compared to a white kid, he growing up around intellects and seeing that his parents and his neighbors are making it, so he held that same ambition, and the same drive as them. So he stepped forward and say, "I'm gonna be like that." That's why they get the term for little white kids who say, "I'm gonna be a doctor, a lawyer, or attorney." Well, you have black kids that didn't say that. They just said, "I'm gonna try to make it and be like my dad," which they see their dad is probably selling dope or a low-end job.
Okay, so the poverty, okay.
Well, socially enforced poverty, we can break it down to just poverty that's enforced. So, kids who never even had a chance to, to just see anything different. So with them not being exposed, what he hinting at, like, not being exposed, to different things. So he doesn't get, the kids, children never get a chance to venture out and do something different. So I guess with that lack of exposure, it leads to them not ever being able to see things from a different vantage point.
Okay.
Green shirt over here, indeed.
Yeah.
On the other aspect of what he's talking about, some kids do come up with a little money, or their parents might have a little success, but to be socially enforced to poverty is to see your peers saying, "Oh, this is cool," or "You gotta go buy this," and you on the internet looking for the newest clothes and the newest shoes, and I gotta give me a $20,000 car, and I don't even have a $20,000 job a year. There's more social enforced poverty.
Okay, very good. One more. Okay.
And to piggyback on what he was saying, in a different aspect, you can be raised around poverty and people doing the wrong things, but at the same time, some people may be exposed to other things like private schools. They may go to private schools and whatnot, but because they live in that environment and that's what they're around all the time, even though they know right, it's still enforced upon them because that's what they're seeing.
Okay, very good. And all of you guys are correct and in the ballpark, right? That how these indices of our lives kind of perpetuate certain outcomes. At the core of this, or the umbrella of this, is the notion that Wright is saying a greater hand. For instance, how many of y'all know Dr. Rico Chapman in the history department? Okay, Dr. Chapman and myself and a couple of others, we had this idea about 10, 15 years ago. We were all going to live in this neighborhood. In fact, I lived on Top Street for 14 years. I lived in this neighborhood for 14 years. And we were all, because when we were students, the professors lived in this neighborhood. So and then people started moving to different places, but all of our professors lived in this neighborhood. So we were going to all buy houses in the Jackson State neighborhood. We loved West Jackson. One of the reasons we love West Jackson, just for historical context, is everything that's on County Line Road, everything that's on County Line Road, everything that's on County Line Road was once on Highway 80 between Terry Road and Highway 18. So you need to understand that the West Jackson that you guys inhabit is a completely different West Jackson than we inhabit. We had no reason to go to North Park because the only thing that was in North Park was North Park Mall and trees. There was nothing on County Line Road. So when I went and got my loan, I applied for a loan for my house. I was living on Top Street and I was going to add on to my house. That's all I wanted to do. I was going to add another room to my house. I had the credit to get the loan, but they wouldn't give me the loan. Why? Not just because I was black, the neighborhood, right? So that's socially enforced poverty. When the policies are created that force people to live in certain areas and to limit their ability to build their own neighborhood. So I live where I live now, not because that was my first choice, but because of the policies. It was like I had good credit for nothing. Because even though I had good credit, I couldn't get a loan to simply improve where I had lived for 14 years. When Wright goes to work for this when Bigger goes to work for this rich white man, the irony is that he actually is the slum landlord, Mr. Dalton. So he's the, quote, good white man, and yet the best that the good white man can do is own the slum neighborhood. So Bigger is raised in a socially impoverished circumstance where there are no jobs in his area. That means there are no taxes. Taxes means that you don't have the type of education you desire. If you don't have the type of education you desire, then you don't have the ability to think, how do I change and build this world? So we have to understand that Bigger Thomas is a product, right, of socially enforced poverty, just like this neighborhood is a product of socially enforced poverty, to where even if you wanted to live in West Jackson, like myself and Dr. Chapman and about 4 or 5 of us wanted to do, we didn't have the financial resources. We weren't criminals. We weren't bad people. Yet the banks all said, no, we're not going to give y'all money to develop this area. So you have to understand that while we have to have personal and individual responsibility, right, is also saying there needs to be held accountable some governmental responsibility for the resources that all people are given to share in this thing called Americana.
Okay. Anybody have anything else to say about that before I go to the next topic? I want to cover as many as possible because there's so much here. The next thing I want to talk about is one thing that Wright does very skillfully. Lots of people write about it, and it has to be examined, is that he uses popular culture. He uses what we talk about every day, media images, to show that Bigger is a result of his environment. That Bigger is affected by what he sees, and he starts by using a very, very important scene. Bigger is actually at the cinema. He's at the movies. He's watching a film. And the images that he sees whites are glamorous,
Right.
and he associates it with money and what people have. But the images at the same time in the same film of the blacks who are in the film are all of them they're half dressed and they're doing jungle dances. Okay, so those are the two depictions that he's seeing as far as the races are concerned. Let's talk about media images and how not only Bigger is affected, but how you all are affected by them.
You want to go? Yeah. Okay, all right. The billboard for the film, right? This white hero, all glamorous, and Bigger seems to know innately that that could never be him, right? Everybody that's a hero in Bigger's world is white. And if from the womb until 18, you never see a black person doing anything positive. So Bigger's notion is not only, can I do it, do I even have the ability to dream? There's a plane that goes overhead. And Bigger says, man, I would like to fly planes. And then immediately after he says, I would like to fly planes, there's the thought, only white people fly planes. Right? So you have to understand that these images that we see on a daily basis, right, are programmed, especially if you're, again, returning to Bigger's position where he doesn't have anyone in his home to provide another narrative, right? So parenting is key in that parents should then provide the type of media to which we expose ourselves, right? My mother and father were readers. So I actually, before I was 15, 16, read more books than I watched television. I didn't really get into television until my teens. So I was not immediately programmed by television. Bigger has no parental foundation to say, let me give you some alternative. And I'll give you something, and I'm going April 12th to see Jackie Robinson. All right, let me say this clearly. I'm going to see this, because some of y'all going to think I'm not going to see this after I make this statement. So Jackie Robinson, I think, is an important figure, honorable man. Because of my father and mother's intellect and the things to which they exposed me to, I really didn't think Jackie Robinson was that big of a deal. I think that actually, if you just want to know how I felt at 15, in my mind, what he did destroyed the Negro Leagues. Yeah. You had far better black athletes, and the great thing about the Negro Leagues is you also had some black ownership. Other than Magic Johnson, how many black people own a Major League Baseball team? And at some point, we need to understand that ownership of an institution is more important than working in the institution. And again, Bigger Thomas had no model of owning an institution. He barely had a model of working within the institution. So the images that we have, the question is, how many images do you have of black people controlling and owning things? Or how many images do you have of black people being labor with not even an intellectual ability to decide what happens in that institution? So we have to understand, as Dr. McDaniel is saying, what Wright is doing by showing us Bigger being immersed in popular culture. And as critical thinkers, you have to ask yourself, how is this image, this television show, this film, this song, how does it affect my psyche? And as you get older, how does it affect the psyche of the children? Are you raising your children to think white people fly planes?
Questions? Comments on that one? Yeah.
I just wanted to add another point about the white people flying planes. There was recently an all-black, all-female flight crew on a flight from Atlanta to Nashville, or it was either Nashville to Atlanta. And the captain of that flight happened to be a graduate of my high school. So.
And where's your high school?
South Cobb High School in Austell, Georgia.
Have any of you seen any of the media on that? Because some of their photos are out there. They're posing all together.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen the media on that.
So look it up.
And to the point though, everybody in this room should know that.
Yeah.
Not just some of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
I guarantee you, most of us know who made the baddest slam dunk on ESPN the other night. does everybody understand the point that I'm making?
Yeah.
That you have to question not just the images before you, but you have to question who decides what images are displayed. So let me make it plain this way. I've been saying for the last 20 years, there's no such thing as black music. There has not been anything of black music since 1976. Stevie Wonder sung in the Key of Life. And here's why there's no such thing as black music. If you don't own the company, control who gets signed to the company, and control the distribution, which is actually more important than the other two. If you don't control the distribution of it, then it's not yours. So if black people don't own the company, own who gets signed to the contracts, and own the distribution of that art, then there's no such thing as black music. What we have is a perverted form of black music through somebody else's eyes. And if we don't understand that, then we'll keep thinking that what we're getting is authentic of black culture. I used to always wonder, being the least hip-hop person I know, why was it that when I got to see young brothers and sisters engaged in regional or local hip-hop, I didn't hate that nearly as much as the hip-hop that was on radio and TV? Because what I realized was that the hip-hop that's on radio and TV, somebody outside of the community is making a decision about what that is. As opposed to the young children in these towns and in these regions are making their own decisions. Unfortunately, the bulk of those young people don't get the contracts because they're not projecting the type of image that the mass society is comfortable of seeing black people be.
And if they do, then they fall under the control of those who own it. Yeah. So then Prince then will be the only person that actually
After Ray Charles,
producing
yeah,
black music.
that controls, owns, distributes,
His own music.
yeah, and walked away from a $100 million contract
In
to do
order
that.
to do it.
It's partially our fault as a group. What you see on TV is only get paraded and masqueraded by what the mass community wants to see, like you said. So you have people in town that I can hear somebody walking around passing out CDs, and the first thing you see your friends or some of your peers do is throw it away. You know what I'm saying? So that's a part of us as a group where we feed into and what we see. And of course, being white owned, like business being owned, they're only going to project what's the bigger ratings and what they want to see and what's going to get the most money.
Exactly. Those hands. Yeah. You want to say something?
It was kind of something like what he said, you know, with the image and people. Because, like, if you think of a rapper, when they're underground rapper or whatever, they have a certain type of music. But then it's like when they get mainstream, they may be the same way for a little bit, but eventually their whole image changed, their music changed, and then a lot of people are like, I don't even like them anymore because they've changed to cater to white people.
Marketable.
To get them,
Marketability. So I guess then the question that you have to ask yourselves after hearing those comments, you have to ask yourself the question, are you a smart consumer of the media? Are you informed, your own person, are you informed about what you're actually seeing and looking at and watching? Because I know you all consume a lot of reality TV now. I mean, and almost you can't help it. It's on almost everything, isn't it? So how smart are you as a consumer when you are taking in these images? Let's move to, let me see. There is the quote where Bigger starts, or right, basically says that the two murders, because let's go back to the murders, that the two murders that Bigger commits basically define him. For the first time, he has a sense of self. He has some type of idea about who he is. He sees some self-worth. For the first time, he feels like he has some power or some control over something. So, and he says to himself, or Rice says that Bigger thinks, I did this. You know, I did this. And all of these people are looking for me because I did this. I see a hand right there.
Oh, I was on the last topic we just got off of. When I was like in elementary and going into middle school, my dad used to block BET and MTV and VH1. And I always wondered why did he do that. Now that I'm coming up in age, I actually see the reality of why he did that, and like now I thank him for that. Because like I always was confused like how these kids get to see the hottest videos and I can't, or why they getting all these nice clothes, and I say, now that I see, which was a good thing that what my dad did, because now it's only mess and a bad image of black people, and how, like they said, was it Michael Jackson, the first black person to have a video on MTV?
Now, he was the first one in rotation. He wasn't the first black on there, but he was the first one to have one that was called heavy rotation.
Yeah. So I mean, like this just shows you how powerful media is and how it controls the community that you're in, and also the environment, and gives the wrong image.
And that goes, I guess you're saying it goes directly back to Mr. McInnes, it's about parenting as an issue and us coming up and identifying ourselves. Okay, so we go to the 2 murders, and that Bigger seems to get some sense of power from them, some sense of self for the first time. He feels like he is, you know, making something happen. And I want to talk about that sense of self or the way it makes him feel, but I also want to talk about the 2 differences in the murders. You know, when he murders Mary, the Caucasian woman, it's accidental.
Right.
And he is covering up what he's done because of the fear of what will happen to him. But when he murders Bessie, which nobody really talks about even at the trial, his black girlfriend, off and on girlfriend, he actually rapes her and he bashes her head in with a brick. And just the 2 situations or what's being shown there. Talk about that for me.
Well, in the book, it mentioned that Bigger did not see whites as individuals. He saw them as a white oppressive force that was being brought down upon him. And so I guess that when he murdered the white girl out of cold blood, I guess that since that white oppressive force was down upon him, I guess it felt like after he murdered her, that force was being lifted off of him. You know, he had, you know, like even though white people had controlled everything, you know, and they were the ones who had all the power. It's that after he murdered her, it's just like a great weight had just been lifted off of him. And as for the girlfriend, honestly, I think it was just that's just murder. It was just he didn't want her to be like involved. I don't know. It's just murder.
Just murder.
I kept in the book, no matter how many times I look at it or see it, or even watch the film, you know, once they get to the trial and they're discussing Mary and what he's done and describing him as an animal and all of these, and there's a natural act for him to be violent, I keep wanting to say, damn, what about Bessie? You know, nobody said anything about Bessie.
Right. And we have to return to the blind rage that exists in the cities and misguided or perverted notions of manhood and survival. See, we have to understand that, yeah, I can do something and live another day, but is that short-term or long-term? You know, and when we don't really have an understanding of morality, of process, decision-making, a lot of decisions that we make to survive from Monday to Tuesday are the decisions, however, that will cause us to either die or be in jail later in the week. One of my mentors said to me once, Dr. Reginald Martin, he said that the biggest problem for a lot of young black men is the very things they learn to survive in the streets are the very aspects that keep them from going to college. That particular skill set that allows them to survive from one day to the next is very myopic and short term because that's all it can breed. So Bigger's feeling of power is a feeling of misguided power because it's based on the perversion that might is right. Now, where do we get that notion of might and right? Well, we get it from the top down, right? If your country is powerful and oppressing you, not because it's moral. I would say America doesn't win wars because we're right. We win wars because we're more powerful. And let me say it one more time in case people think I misspoke or that I'm afraid. No, America doesn't win wars because we are right. We win wars because we are more powerful. And so we have confused being mightyful. And by the way, I make that statement as a person who I have an honorable discharge from the Mississippi National Guard. So I don't have hatred for the military, but we need to understand that our policies, America is built on what? It was not built on religious freedom. It wasn't built on a bunch of Christians wanting to come over here and love. America was built because somebody wanted to take somebody else's stuff and use it. That's our culture. And until we understand, so from the top down, so that if you're on the top and you're under the bottom, and you're looking at the top, and you're seeing that the people on the top are winning not because they're more moral than you, but because they're gangsters, then you think the best way to survive is to become a
Gangster.
So then, returning to parenting, what we then need are more parents who can say we need a more intellectual and moral plan, because gangsterism, especially for the oppressed, gangsterism, especially for the poor, always leads to being in jail. Poor people rarely are rewarded for their gangsterism. So we have to understand that what Wright is saying is that, yes, Bigger felt powerful after killing these two women, although after killing the white woman, it was more, he kind of stumbled into the power, right? He purposely was trying to kill Bessie. He mistakenly smothered Mary, the white woman. That was a mistake because he was trying to hide the fact that he was in her room. And the ironic thing about that is he was actually doing something good. She was drunk and he was taking her to her room. So he was actually doing a good deed. But Mary's mother, who's blind, comes into the room. Man, this is 1940. No black man wants to be caught in a white woman's room in 1940. So as Mary begins to awake, he tried to keep her quiet. And again, coming back to the lack of intellectual forethought, the only way he conceives of keeping her quiet is putting a pillow over her face. At that moment you read the book, we all going, no, bigger. And so he smothers her by mistake. It's not until after, when they're looking for him, he begins to get this surge of power. Yeah. Well, we have to think about how perverse does someone have to be to think that it's a good thing to be a wanted criminal. But in a sense, that's what we have. We have young men in our communities who think it's a good thing to have served time, to think it's a good thing to have harmed somebody. Returning to my stepson's roommate, there is somebody walking around who thinks it's a good thing that they shot somebody 13 times who was in the bed. This young man didn't even have a chance to get out the bed. And so there are people, and so there's a perverseness that we have to engage in our community, and we have to stop worrying whether or not it's cool to impact that perverseness. I'll stop there.
Okay, I want to tag on though. When you talked about him having that misguided sense of manhood or self or power, there's something else going on there too. Because you're saying it's crazy for him to think that this should define him. But I guess we have to tag on a borrow from Ellison then. For anybody, most of you, if you're not, you should be familiar with Invisible Man. Anybody familiar with Invisible Man? I didn't say you had to read it. I just said you should know that it exists and who wrote it so you'll read it later.
And not the Invisible Man, but the white guy who was invisible.
Right.
Not him.
But Invisible Man. And what happens here is that up until that point, Bigger has felt invisible because of lack of self-work. So for the first time, people notice him, even if it's because they're in a man chase, that the police are after him. So what about that, I guess?
Well, that comes from that power. I'll give you an interesting example. I was once asked a question, and he said, why is it there's no record of a black man beating a black woman, before 1865? That there's no record of a black man beating a black woman before 1865. And the reason is, because in America, you can't beat what you don't own. Now, that's sexism, that's racism, but that's perversion of humanity. That under slavery, we were invisible. And particularly black men were invisible. So after slavery, some black men decide one of the ways to deal with my invisibility, to obtain power, is to embrace the same sexism over my woman that I saw used. Right? Understand how you cannot be any more invisible as a man than to know that the woman that's laying with you in your shack just left master's bedside. And there's absolutely nothing you can do with it. The woman with whom you have jumped the broom, and that's your wife, is also the bed maiden of the master. You can't be any more invisible. Sometimes when I think about it, I try to wrap my brain around. Right? What if I knew my wife was sleeping with her boss every day? I knew it. They didn't hide it. Right? He sometimes came by the house and slept with her. Sent me on errands to sleep with her. So there's an invisibility and a perversion that what happens is then you begin, because this is all you know and this is how you've been miseducated. Carter G. Wilson's Miseducation of the Negro. Don't leave Jackson State without graduating. Don't leave here without reading Carter G. Wilson's Miseducation of the Negro. That, again, in this perverted society, one of the ways that young black males are able to not be invisible is by brute force. That's why we walk around mean mugging people. That's why we walk around with our chest poked out. Because it's the only way that we cannot be invisible. That's why we make somebody else move to the other side of the street. We want to be as tough and as bold as we can because we think that keeps us from being invisible. Unfortunately, for the oppressed, it leads to either incarceration or death.
And that's what white people tag in after slavery with Jim Crow. After Jim Crow, massive jail cell. Like they said, you're in 3rd grade as a black person. They make a jail for you because they live off the same drive that we feel like we gotta walk around and be the toughest, hardest, whatever type of person that other people see black people being.
Exactly.
Okay. To the depths of Bessie, I don't think it was more so he was just trying to be more like brutally forceful, killing Bessie than killing Miss Dawson, Mary Dawson. Even though he did bash her head in, I think he was just more so paranoid of like just being in the water that he never ever charted before, you know? Because he threw her body down, you know, the little shaft, and he forgot to even take the money that he stole from his dog, you know? So I think that he just was more so paranoid of, you know, just never ever, you know, have control of his life and finally having that control. He didn't know what to do with it.
I agree that that definitely is the complexity of the paranoia. I would only add to that the very dysfunctional relationship that he had with Bessie. Yeah. One of my favorite lines from Bessie, when you're in college and you hear this, you know, it's like being in church, right? When the preacher talking and you like, it's fine when you talking about other people's sin, when you don't want the preacher talking about your sin. Hey, preacher need to move on now. He need to go on. He being messy. And being an 18-year-old male, I remember the first time I read this and Bessie said to Bigger, only time you come see me is when your love come down. And I think everybody can figure what Bessie is saying. You know, if not, only time he went to see Bessie was when? Wanted to have sex. So this very dysfunctional relationship that they had based mostly on sex and the power that Bigger gets through the sex. So I don't disagree that part of what it is this paranoia, I'm in this situation. But I think the overreaction to it can be connected to his overreaction to the rat. In fact, Bigger treats Bessie the same way he treats the rat. That he basically bashes and demolishes Bessie's whole existence in the same way that he bashes and demolishes this rat. And then we have to then ask, what is Wright trying to show us in this unbridled passion for violence? Right? This drive not just to kill. Right, again, returning to my stepson's roommate. 13 shots? For what? Somebody in the bed? So you connect the 13 shots to somebody laying in bed, to the bashing of Bessie's head, to the bashing of that rat. And Wright is forcing us to question, what is the root and nature of this unbridled, overwhelming anger that exists in inner city communities?
And it's regarding that point, but I question his issues with women.
Oh, yeah.
Because none of the women in the book are positive characters. And they have have their own sense of invisibility because they're written out of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And the one woman that is there is violently and brutally bashed, as you say, by him. And I think there is a difference between the way that the white girl was killed and the way that Bessie was killed. It's an extreme force of violence, and young black women experience type of violence at the hands of young black men every day. And whether it's physical violence or emotional violence, or the violence of abandonment, of having children that are not being parented, that's violence too. The violence of going to court, the violence of sitting there doing time with some dude, you know, 5, 10 years and you're 20. You're gonna spend 25 of your 20 years.
Or you doing time instead of him.
Right, you know, or you can like hiding his drugs. So I think that, you know, it also gets to male-female interactions or the lack of. And it's very similar in Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. The women are negative if they're there at all. So what do we make about that?
Well, when we make that right, definitely had issues. If you read Black Boy, if you read The Outsider, and particularly Wright had issues with religious black women. And his mother, right. You know, because Wright saw himself as being abused by religious black women. Because most of these religious black women were just going to beat the devil out of. If you, the aunt in Black Boy, I can tell you, I hate her. I'm just going to be honest with you. And my aunt was my Sunday school teacher. And my aunt was nothing like this lady. But yeah, this whole notion, right, of relationships that little boys have with their mothers, particularly if they're single parents, and right, forcing us to say, we really need to analyze the relationship that young men have with their mothers, because this is a pattern, right? The pattern that Wright keeps giving us, that the poor relationship that his male characters have with the females, and I struggle to find if there's ever a positive relationship that a male character has with a female. And then again, so that's Wright again saying, yes, Wright have this problem. Read Margaret Walker's Demonic Genius. If you really want to kind of understand underlying, and you know, and I say some things about Margaret Walker's Demonic Genius. There's some other ulterior motives that Walker has writing Demonic Genius. Not going to get into that now because we wouldn't have enough time to really deal with it. But read Demonic Genius and Wright's and Walker's portrait of Wright's relationship with women, and it will give you insight to Bigger's relationship with women, to the character in Black Boy's relationship with women.
Question in the middle.
Well, you know how you said Bigger used to go to the movie and see a white man and as the hero and the black people as nothing. So once he like compared that to the murder of Mary and Betsy, the murder of Mary was innocent and like plain innocent, but the murder of his girlfriend, who was black, was like he wanted to do it. He's saying like, well, you ain't nothing, just like that rat I just killed.
Like
so
just like me, that's what he said.
So you mean, so I mean, I can kill you any way I want to, and they still not gonna know like, oh, she was just a black person and like she ain't nothing. But compared to the white woman, it was after her, that was after him after he killed her. So I guess that's how you, that's how I compare it to.
No. Who's seen the movie Juice? Okay? Remember what the Tupac character said? And they asked him, you know, what's wrong with you? And I won't use profanity, but that character says, I already know that I ain't nothing. And once I realize that you ain't nothing, I'm going to kill you too. That's what self-hatred is. If I hate myself, I by nature must hate everyone who looks like me. So if I'm a black man and I hate myself, not only do I hate other black men, I definitely hate black women too, as a notion of my lack of manhood and ability to control who and what I am. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just gonna say this Tom, he was president of the time, you know, like with the images that, you know, that was put out in front of him, that was more so the reason that had to do with him, just him feeling the way that he felt about himself. But I'm just saying that just how the murder occurred, like at the point in the book, I think that it wasn't, you know, he was subconsciously, I think that he did have a problem with women, but I don't think that his intent was to sit there and be more physical killing her than he did with Mary, because I don't think that by nature he wanted to kill either one of them. You know what I'm saying? But just so happened he did.
No, and that gets to, no, I agree with what you're saying, and it also gets to, I was having this discussion with Dr. Sophia Omari the other day about that missing ability of decision making, right? let's return to the dice game, right? The killing dice game killing. Where is the thought of it's not really that serious to shoot these 3 people over a dice game? Like I had a friend once, and I wouldn't watch sports with him because he would get so emotional that he would put a hole in his own wall. And I remember once my wife asked, "You ain't want to invite him over to watch the game?" I'm like, "No, I seen his wall. He ain't coming to my house." Put holes in. But so the question becomes, right, in our arrested emotional development, right? Where is that moment that we go and say, this is overkill, right? This is an overreact. Where's the emotional and intellectual, right? And clearly, Bigger is never developed in a way, right, where he can rationally analyze circumstances and say, what's the appropriate response to the circumstance? I see it. I always when I'm dealing with my students. I was talking to a young man one day, and we were just talking about class, and that's what we were doing. I want y'all to know that's what we were doing. We were talking about class, and all of a sudden he said, "Hey man, you ain't gotta talk to me like that. You gotta be all like that. You ain't gotta talk to me." And at first I knew I ain't gotta. Hey, I'm just reading the syllabus. That's literally what I was doing. I was reading. So the question from me reading the syllabus to this young man becoming overly angry, immediately there was a question for me is, what's missing that he doesn't understand that the proper reaction to my reading of the syllabus is simply, Mr. McInnes, I either don't understand this policy or I don't agree with this policy, and can I get you to explain to me why you have this policy? Coming back to our intellectual and emotional development that Bigger clearly did not have. And that so many of our young men don't have.
Besides that, I think the hate of women stems from his mother, the relationship he had from his mom. When she said, "I wish I could have you, why did I have you?"
Because I never birthed you, yeah.
So, I mean, hearing that from your mom, you have that sense like, oh, I'm dead?
Yeah.
Like,
and let's be clear. You don't have to say that as a parent. Your child knows if you want them or not.
yeah, and like, I think that's why he developed that inner hate for women. So, from that relationship from his mom,
and we have to question, though, why does Wright keep giving us this? See, if it was a single situation, right, as the sister raised, then okay. But novel after novel, Wright is calling our attention. And the question is, once we recognize this pattern, what are y'all as future degree Negroes going to do about dealing in any aspect of your life?
And keep in mind in this strange conversation we're talking about rights problems with women. That's what you raised at first. And how that is reflected in the characters he creates as well. So we're talking about both. Let's move. You mentioned something a little bit earlier. Both of you all did. That he's a product of his environment and so forth. So let's talk about the title. That what Wright is saying here too is that Bigger is the native son that he's examining. What does he mean by that? What makes him a native son?
That Bigger is, and we all get the joke, right? We all get the joke of Bigger's name, right? You can change the B with an N, right? Get it? Okay. So I just always amazed a lot of people miss that joke, right? That it really is Nigger Thomas, right? He just couldn't, the publisher wouldn't allow him to do that, so he went with Bigger Thomas. Who's seen Django? Django Unchained. Okay, I'm not going to get into if it's good, if it's bad. Here's what I want to focus. One of the core things that I'll give Tarantino credit, and it's difficult for me to give Tarantino credit for anything, but I'll give Tarantino credit, is that Tarantino is really clear that he affirms Eldridge Cleaver's notion that violence is as American as apple pie. And so that what you leave from Django with the notion that slavery had to be what it was because that's the very foundation of what America is. Why is the reason that football is the great sport loved in America? Because of violence. Anything that was MMA, violence. The reason that things like track and field and baseball and other games, not enough violence. So we have to ask ourselves, why is it that everything in America that we love is somehow connected to? Now, let's be real Freudian here for a moment. Even the sex we celebrate in America is directly tied to a very aggressive, violent type. Look at the names that we have for it. Knocking boots, hitting it, knocking it out. Even so that our engagement of American sexuality, right? Gone with the Wind, one of the most favorite scenes in Gone with the Wind is a rape scene, and Red Butler is made a hero. He literally rapes her. When he's taking her up the stairs, he's taking her up the stairs against her will, but he's an American hero because the whole message is she wanted him to do it.
Or he's teaching her a lesson.
Oh, he's teaching her a lesson on top. So rape is teaching a woman a lesson. So the native son, Bigger Thomas, is simply, again, what Wright is saying, bigger is everything that your culture has created, and you are a hypocrite if you don't understand that bigger and everything that he is what you are and what you created.
It's like the end of that Ice Cube song when he says that they have, 23 laws, whatever that they done, they'll lock you up for, and he just starts listing.
Yeah.
Like, you're right, it's so true, it's such,
Yeah.
democracy.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy. I like that.
Let's go to, I know we're running out of time, and there's some things I want to make sure we get to, because students are taking notes on a few of them. The whole idea of Wright, and he was criticized when the book came out and it was reviewed for actually using Native Son as a way to get out communist propaganda. He is a card-carrying communist at that time. And that this was a way for him to get out communist propaganda, and that he does so because he uses the lawyer, Max, as a mouthpiece for touting their own beliefs. Let's talk about that as connected with the justice system itself.
Well, first and foremost, you either agree or disagree with W.B. Du Bois. And Du Bois said that in the final analysis, all art is propaganda. So you either agree that all art is propaganda, or you disagree that all art is propaganda. Since I agree with Du Bois that all art is propaganda, my feeling about you is if you don't understand that all art is propaganda, then you are a fool that's being taken advantage of by the art to which you expose yourself. So, no matter what one's political ideologies are, they're going to be manifest in the art that one creates. The problem that the reviewers had with Max and the message is that essentially the lawyer is saying, right, and Wright is saying through the lawyer, that because you have failed to care for all of your citizens, because you have failed to share the wages, right? Communism is about the workers should get the bulk of the profits. Because you have failed, America, to share your wages with your workers, then this is what you get. And that if you work people, my grandmother used to always say, be careful of people who beat people out their wages. That's what she always said. She said, don't ever deal with anybody who beat people out their wages. And when you continue to beat people out of their wages, what do you think? What do you think gonna happen? I had a friend who was he was like, if you looked up nerd, he was the nerd. And we were working at a job together, and the money wasn't right, so they said they wasn't gonna pay us. And he went to the boss, all 87 pounds of him, and he said, if I don't get my check, I'm going to take your computer to the pawn shop. Now, that was the wrong Bigger Thomas reaction. But what do you think is going to happen if you continue not to give people their just desert in the profit margin? So one, it can't help but be political, be propaganda, because all art is propaganda. And if you don't understand that all art is propaganda, that's because somebody's taking advantage of you and you will become vulnerable to somebody else's ideas. And once you understand that all art is propaganda, then you understand that what these reviewers hated was the fact that that was right through Max with communism, indicting the American structure for saying, you have people, laborers, who you work to death, you don't pay them, you don't have a health care plan. Do you think that at some point these people are not going to rise up and kill y'all?
Since you mentioned Du Bois, we talked about art as propaganda. So another thing that Du Bois talks about, he talks about the two-ness of the Negro, of the American Negro, that he has these two sides or two minds or two ideals about who he is and how he fits into public self and private self. Let's talk about that as far as Bigger is concerned.
Bigger, of course we know Bigger hates himself. He hates his friends, right? The relationship he has with his friends is a very perverted type of relationship. And it makes me wonder about the dozens, right? So most of us grew up playing the dozen. They're probably not as popular in you guys' time as they were in my time growing up playing the dozen. You know, the dozen, you know, your mama's so fast you sweat gravy, right? You know, those kind of things. So it's a name for what they do. And the dozens is the best example of black creativity and perversion. Because with our own self-hatred, we are able to take demeaning things and make them world class. Soul food essentially was created because we were given the scraps. So we took a negative and made it the problem is soul food to kill you. My problem with the movie Soul Food is everybody who left the movie Soul Food, man, made me want to go get something to eat. Soul Food made me want to go take a jog. Because we forget Big Mama died because of the soul food.
Yeah, but it's ironic because it kept them alive too.
And that's the dichotomy, right? That's the dichotomy that we're always battling with, this two-ness. And that's the part of our self-hatred.
I could drink or I could kill you. I could drink or I could kill you. I could drink or I could kill you.
There you go.
Right.
They're drinking.
And that's drinking. And now let me get real personal and make half the people in this room angry. But I really want to say this because I want us to really understand the two-ness and the self-hatred and the double consciousness of how we're always looking at ourselves through somebody else's eyes. We have to understand that the fact that the vast majority of black women sitting in this room have permed hair, beautiful permed hair, artistically permed hair. All right, let me be clear. That again is that notion that we are so creative that we can take a negative like self-hatred because your hair is permed because you hate yourself. You don't know that's the reason why your hair is permed. And if you take my world literature class, I'm going to break that down for you. Right? But, so you have this artistic ability to create this wonderful design that other people copy. Yet simultaneously, drink or kill you, that while you're creating this design, you are still perpetuating your own self-hatred because you hate yourself so much you can't bear to see yourself in your African natural state. So we have to understand that that's what Du Bois is saying about double consciousness, that black people are always judging ourselves by somebody else's lens. And here's the deal. I'll never be a better Matthew person than Matthew person. So as long as I define myself through Matthew person, I'm always second. Right? As long as, and this is going to be upset some people, just take the analogy. As long as LeBron James was trying to be Michael Jordan, he was always less than. It was only the moment that the switch came on and said, I can't be Michael Jordan, I can only be LeBron James. This is going to really trip you out. Richard Pryor wanted to be Bill Cosby. I mean, he was a suit wearing, no profanity using, straight lace, make white people feel comfortable coming. And it was Bill Cosby who said Richard Pryor didn't start being funny until he stopped trying to be like me. That's double consciousness. As long as black people judge who we are through somebody else's eyes, we'll always hate ourselves because we'll always fall short of the mark that we set. Yes.
Young black men gotta hear that. Gotta hear that. Gotta hear
Yeah.
that.
What time is your
What
work
they want to begin with because they don't have a father. So they know. They never get to see that to begin with. If they don't know that they got to be themselves to reach what they trying to reach, man.
That's the simpleness of it. You got to read. Us as a black community, we don't even want to read about where our second generation great grandparents did. Where we really truly came from, when all you gotta do is read, it's there for you.
That's American culture too, so that's also that double consciousness.
Yeah.
Being a black, or Negro, or American, is we are also Americans, and I think that part of what kills us too is we either go one side or the other. We want to deny all our blackness to become Americans, or we want to deny being American,
Right.
and we're gonna live in the black house on the black block with the black wife, start the black car, and have a black dog.
Right.
Super black.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we still have those dueling identities and those warring ideals, and America is anti-intellectual.
Yeah.
As a culture, we're
Yeah.
anti-intellectual. We want someone to tell us, we want them to break it down, we want them to distill it, we want them to spoon feed it to us, and then only then are we going to pay any attention. So
Right.
Americans don't want to read. So you layer that on top of being black and American, you doubly disadvantaged if you don't read. So
Amen.
that's just the problem that we have as a culture. It's part of our culture.
That's the point of him saying we're gonna be degree Negroes, because like after you get a degree, what you gonna do? Go back home with your mama? Like what you gonna be doing just
Right.
because you have a degree?
Right.
If you don't read or
If you don't
research
learn
what you wanna
anything.
get into
Right.
after achieving
You
your
gotta
degree,
actually learn
it's
something.
like you defeated your purpose of being
And
one to
also,
begin with.
critical thinking.
Mhm.
You,
Right.
why would you let somebody think for you? You, matter of fact, the parent should at least push you even harder. It keeps from not having a support system. If you have a support system, you ain't gonna wanna do nothing.
Right.
Like, I can't lay in the bed all day.
Mhm.
And like, without my mom like saying, hey, you gonna get up?
Right.
The support, she want me to get up so I can be something.
Right.
But if nobody had a support system, I'm still gonna be alive and still keep my lazy like butt in the bed.
Yeah.
That's still lazy, you need support, because someday you gotta wake up and say, I have self-motivation, because this is your life.
And nobody's waking up.
Well, but, and I agree, and we'll come to you because well, we have to be careful with self. I agree with you. We need self motivation, but the truth of the matter is that self motivation must be laid by the seed created by the parents. So because what happens is, coming back to Americana, is we fall into the fallacy of the self-made man, right? And that's really, if there's one negative with Frederick Douglass's narrative, and I love Frederick Douglass and I love his narrative. If there's one negative about that narrative, in the beginning of the narrative, Frederick Douglass is deep within the black community. At the end of the narrative, he fulfills the Americana idea. He's completely separate from the black community. And so what we have to understand is that yes, we have to have internal drive, individual drive, but then even that individual drive is by that support system that's placed. As you said, I was like you. For me, sleeping late is 8 a.m. I wake, depending on when I have a class, I either wake at 5:30 or 6:30. So since I have an 8 a.m. class, I wake at 5:30. I meditate and pray from 5:30 to 5:50, and I'm jogging by 6 o'clock. Same thing, yeah. So the same thing. So for me, sleeping late, right? And then when I left church for 20 years, didn't go to church. When I returned to church, I go to 8 a.m. service because that's early. That's because again, I'm used to awaking at a certain time. So your mother. In the same way that my mother and my grandmother said, the only thing in bed after 8 o'clock is a lazy tail man. That's what I heard that in my entire, so even when I'm on vacation, I can't be in bed past 8 o'clock. Sister Deb was going to say something.
I'm from New Orleans, and half the stuff the rappers rap about, I done seen. So it's like, I grew up in the hood and all of that, but my mom always instilled, and I came from a single parent household, and my mom always instilled in me that you have to want education for yourself. True enough, I want you to be educated, and that is going to allow you to achieve the things you want to achieve, but you can't ride my coattail.
Right.
And my mom has a nursing degree, and she's a chemical engineer as well. And I can honestly say, growing up, I know my friends weren't afforded the same opportunities I have, because it's like half of them might have been 10, 15 years apart. So your mother is in my age bracket.
Right.
So it's like I thank my mother for really being a parent. I went to one of the best high schools. I went to Xavier University, and even though this wasn't my first choice, I'm glad I ended up here too. Because if I would have ended up in the city, I probably would have been partying with my friends, and it would have been just like another high school for me. So now being outside of my element, it forces me to have that self-motivation where she doesn't call me every day and be like, oh, are you going to class? Or when I come home on breaks, it's like, so what's your grades looking like? And if they're not right, then that's when I'm gonna hear that from her because it's like, well, you're supposed to be an adult and I know I raised you better than that.
Exactly. Very good.
Well, I know we're at the end of our time.
Y'all was good on this. Thank you. Give yourselves a hand, y'all. This was cool. This was cool. Very good.
Just want to mention to you all that while we were going along, we were actually jotting down or putting some things up here that we think you need to look at and we think you need to read. So hopefully you heard us say Invisible Man by Ellison, The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson, Margaret Walker's The Amani Genius. We also mentioned Du Bois, Soul of Black Folk, other essays by him as well. And Mr. McInnes earlier alluded to about Bigger being made, right? Making Bigger. Well, Wright has an essay entitled How Bigger Was Made.
Right.
So take a look at that if you want to take that anywhere else. The last thing and the other thing that we didn't get into was mentioned here and there. Take a look at religion and how it plays into the text. Wright never would have called himself a religious man. And also he attaches this religion that he has a disdain for to a woman,
right,
which he may also have a disdain for.
Right.
Bigger's mother, and the whole idea of religion being an escape. In fact, Wright equates religion with Bessie being a drunk.
Right. Yeah.
So that's how much he thinks of it in a way. So just parting comments from the two of you.
I've talked enough about Native Son. What I want to do is commend Mr. Person, who's my student. He's now in my 105 class, and so one of the books that they must read is Native Son. I have to read Jubilee and Native Son. And so he's just written his essay on Native Son, and this is what scholarship is. That what I want for you guys as students is to seek these opportunities. If I have one issue with my students, with all of y'all, is that you guys don't seek enough of these intellectual forums. And y'all have the ability. You have to stop looking for someone else to have the solution. Because the community is going to think y'all have the solution. Because again, y'all going to be the degreed Negroes. So I just want to thank my student who could have said, no, I got something else to do, 10 o'clock too. Now, I got the grade, I'm good. And, and I don't know if this is his first kind of intellectual setting and form of this nature, but I want to be able to see you all in forms like this, because we're going to die. We're going to get old, we're going to die. And I ain't going to let none of y'all take care of me. I'm because right now it's looking a little shaky. To be honest with you, it's looking a little shaky now. Y'all get it together. I'm gonna let y'all take care of me. But but both of y'all, but these are the forms that as young people you need to be striving, because you guys are gonna be the policymakers. When there's a law, that's y'all law. You're a citizen, and the question is, what have you done to shape or change that law?
And I'll leave with this last comment. When we tell you as professors that you need to read something, or when we give you a reading assignment in class, read it. Goodbye.